Okay, so let's get started with adding some real texture into our creatures. Now today I'm not going to show you specifically how to add real texture into your creatures, but I am going to give you 3 basic techniques that you could use. You could either use those techniques themselves or you can use them to get an idea to do something a little different. That's completely up to you. So here's an example of each one. I'm going to show you how to create these on your creatures right now. Alright, so for this first step, this is a fringe. I'm going to be using just a piece of paper and some scissors today to show you how to do each of these techniques. But I want to tell you before I start cutting and using my glue that if you want to add color into your texture, you can color your paper first. I'll show you as we go along. Alright, so I'm going to start with my piece of paper. I'm going to cut a strip. I'm going to cut it off screen just because it's hard to hold it. Okay, so I'm going to start with a strip like this, and I'm going to cut it into smaller strips, which you don't have to do, but just for the sake of showing you this sample, I now have a couple small little strips. Now if you want, you can color these strips in and then cut, or you can cut your shapes, your texturized shapes out and then color it. It's up to you. Or if you want to color your monster and then add texture in that's just the color of your paper, or if you want to use different colored papers, you can. There are a lot of different ways that you can do this project. Again, I'm just giving you some really basic demonstrations. So if you want a fringe, go ahead and get your paper, and if you can see, I'll try to move closer to the camera. You just cut straight lines. And you can have fun with this. You could cut curvy lines, make them squiggly. I mean, this is a really great project for you to mess around with things and try something new. But this is just a basic fringe. So as you can see, we have the fringe here, and then we have some paper that's not touched by the scissors on the other side. That's what we're going to use to glue our texture down. So what you want to do is you want to ruffle these a little bit. Take your glue. I like glue sticks for this sort of thing just because it's neater. But of course, if you have just glue, that's fine. Or if you have tape, that'll work too. Maybe it might be a little bit extra work with tape, but it'll still work. So I like to start at the bottom. So pretend that's the bottom of your monster. Then you just keep gluing over top. Boop. See how this creates that fringy look? This is great if you want a monster with hair. And you can ruffle it and see how it creates that texture. And yep, I'll do one more. Just so I use up all my paper, and boom. There you go. Alright, so that is a basic fringe cut. And that is one way that you can add texture into your monster. Now let's move on to our scales, our scalloped cut. We're going to do the same thing, cut a nice strip out of your paper. And of course, when you guys are doing your monsters, you're going to be cutting way more than this, right? You're going to be covering your monster and different textures. So, all right, I'm going to do the same thing where I cut the little strips just to show you. You could also use long strips. You don't have to do the short strips like I'm doing. I'm just showing you so that I can fit these all on my small piece of paper. All right, for this one, I have my strips, right? I'm putting them on top of each other just so I can cut them all together, and that saves time. You can do that as well. So for this, you cut curves. And again, you don't want to cut all the way down your paper unless if you want to add individual scales, which you can also do. Again, this is just a basic demonstration. So see, I have a couple little scales. I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the French. Use my glue stick. Apply the glue to the side of the paper that is untouched by the scissors. Start at the bottom of whichever section of the monster you're putting this texture in. Because remember, we need to have more than one texture. Now for this, it's best to stagger your scales, which is why I brought up the idea of maybe cutting individual scales if you want. I may show you with the last one what I mean by that. Here, I'll apply the last scale layer. See how I stagger them here? So it looks like scales. It wouldn't look the same if you put it over top of each other, right? It looks better when you layer them. Now, you may want to have fun. I'm going to cut this like so. You may want to add random scales in, which is fine. You may want to do that here. You may want to add one up here. Oops, I didn't put glue on that. I apologize. You may want to add one here. Odd one down here. Say I want one there. There you go. Boop. Looks nice and even, right? So again, that is the technique you can use if you want scales on your monster. So this last one will be, it can work if you want hair on your monster, if you want a spiky monster. We're going to do the same thing. Cut that long strip, right? And of course you can cut long strips and just layer the long strips and keep cutting instead of doing the little baby strips. I personally like cutting the small little blocks, the small strips, because it's easier to layer things and to play around with placement on our monster. So I'm going to do the same thing I did with both of these other techniques, but this time, sort of like with the scalloped scales, I'm going to do the same thing, but instead I'm going to do pointy edges. And again, make sure you don't cut your fingers here, and be very careful that you don't go to the other side of the page. And what's great about this is that you can actually use the other side of your strip. Boop. You can use this side as well. So you maximize on the amount of paper that you can use, and it saves you time. So you may like this technique just for the sake of saving time and not cutting quite as much. So I'm sure you have the idea at this point, but just in case if you don't, I'll just put a couple down here. I'll lay a couple of my spikes down, apply the glue, of course, to the side of the strip that has not been touched by scissors. Again, this is a technique that looks good when you stagger them so that the spikes are positioned in between one another. Okay, and I'm actually going to show you again. This is a great technique for you to cut individual spikes out and place them in random spots to make your monster look a little more interesting. So here, maybe I want one there. Maybe I want, boop. Where do I want this other spike? Oops, I apologize. Maybe I want that little spike over here. You decide what you want. So those are the three basic ideas I wanted to share with you today to give you an idea of how you can add texture in your monster. But as I said, I always encourage you to play around with these ideas, add color into your monster, to the textures itself and to your page that you're applying the textures to. And of course, to try to experiment and create your own textures. What can you come up with? What can you show the class that's really cool and interesting? All right, so at this point I want you to start working on your monsters if you haven't done so already, and we will continue to do this for the rest of class today.